Let's look at, let's continue with where we ended. We looked at parathyroid hormone. So let's look at another hormone called calcitonin. So under this, we'll look at the source and chemistry and metabolism, the action of calcitonin, how it is regulated and secreted. Okay. So calcitonin is secreted by the source. It is secreted by the parafollicular cells, or called the C cells, the clear cells. Okay, these are situated among the follicles in the thyroid gland. But recently, calcitonin has been found also to be in the brain, the prostate, and the bronchial cells of the lungs. But the physiological role of this calcitonin in non-thyroid tissues is not very well documented. Okay, so we saw that parathyroid hormone, it's secreted by the chief cells. But for calcitonin, it's secreted by the C cells, or the clear cells, or if you want, you can call it the parafollicular cells. In terms of chemistry, this is also a protein. Remember, hormones can either be steroid hormones, protein, or amide, made up of tyrosine. But this calcitonin is a protein hormone made up of 32 amino acids. Okay, so it is synthesized from procalcitonin, following the same general synthesis of proteins. Okay, where the genes are involved, and there is transfer of the prepro hormone into the endoplasmic reticulum, and then the Golgi apparatus, they package the hormone into vesicles. In terms of metabolism, it is also metabolized by the liver and the kidneys, just like many other hormones. Okay. And in terms of the levels of PTH, of calcitonin, it's also in minute quantities. The normal range in the normal healthy person is about 1 to 2 nanograms per deciliter. So we won't waste much time because we've talked about parathyroid hormone, and usually they have opposite effects, calcitonin and PTH. So the action of calcitonin, it acts on the bones, it acts on the kidneys, it acts on the intestine. Okay, so like on the intestine, it prevents absorption of calcium from the intestine into blood. But we saw that PTH, it favors the absorption of calcium. On the kidney, calcitonin increases excretion of calcium through urine by inhibiting the reabsorption from the renal tubules. But we saw that the PTH, it increases reabsorption of calcium. So it's just the opposite. And then on the bones, calcitonin stimulates osteoblastic activity, not osteoclastic, osteoblastic activity, and facilitates the deposition. Okay, it facilitates the deposition of calcium on bones. At the same time, it suppresses the activity of the osteoclasts and inhibits the reabsorption of calcium from bones. In other ways, calcitonin inhibits the production of the rank ligands. I talked about the rank ligands and the macrophage colony stimulating factors. So it inhibits these, but it promotes the production of the osteoprotegerins. Okay. The osteoprotegerins, they are also called the osteoclastogenesis inhibitory factors. So calcitonin promotes the production of these. So it's just the opposite of parathyroid hormone. So in terms of metabolism, in terms of regulation, this diagram shows clearly how calcitonin is regulated. When is it secreted? It's secreted when there is high levels of calcium in blood, in conditions such as hypercalcemia. So the C cells, they'll release calcitonin, which moves in circulation and then influence the physiology of the bones, the kidneys, and the intestines. All we want at the end of the day is decrease in calcium levels in blood. Okay. And this same decrease in calcium levels in blood, it will have a negative effect on the C cells, therefore reducing calcitonin secretion. So this is just a normal negative feedback mechanism. And then when you talk of another concept or another subtopic, calcium metabolism, because the parathyroid is associated with calcium homeostasis. So it's just important to understand the importance of this same calcium. There are so many importance of calcium. Okay, so many of them. One of them is needed in bone and teeth formation. It's needed in neuronal activity. For example, at the synapse, we know that calcium is needed for exocytosis of neurotransmitters such as acetylcholine, okay, at the neuromuscular junction. Calcium is important in skeletal muscle activity. If you talk of the smooth muscles, for them to contract, they require calcium to bind to calmodulin. Okay, so that they form a calcium calmodulin complex. Cardiac activities, the action potentials of the cardiac muscles is also dependent on calcium and sodium. Okay, if you recall on the action potential of the cardiac muscles. Also, another importance of calcium is secretory activity of the glands. Exocytosis, it's if you look at the mechanism of exocytosis, there is involvement of calcium. Calcium is needed for cell division, it's needed for growth, and coagulation of blood. So there are so many physiological role of calcium. That's why it needs to be regulated within normal values. And what is this normal values? It's between 9 to 11 milligrams per deciliter. Okay. 9 to 11 milligrams per deciliter. So the types of calcium which are found, there is calcium in plasma, there is a calcium in the bones. Okay. So the calcium in plasma is present in three forms. We have ionized or diffusible calcium, which is Ca with a 2+ there. That's ionized calcium. This one is found freely in plasma and forms about 50% of plasma calcium. And then we have the non-ionized or non-diffusible calcium. This one is present as calcium bicarbonate. Okay, and it is about 8-10% of plasma. And then we have the calcium bound to albumin, which is about 40 to 42%. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is that the calcium exists in three forms. Okay, calcium in plasma exists in three forms. We have that one which is ionized, we have the non-ionized, and we have the calcium which is bound to albumin. But the most abundant is the one which is ionized, which is 50%, and then followed by the one bound to albumin, which is about 42%, and then followed by the non-ionized, which is about 10%. Okay. So apart from the calcium being found in plasma, there is also the calcium which is deposited in the bones. Okay. Calcium is constantly removed from the bones and deposited in the bone. So the bones, they act as storage form of calcium. Okay. The bones, they act as storage form of calcium. Now, in terms of diet plays a very important role as a source of calcium. Okay, we get calcium from milk, from cheese, vegetables, sugar, coffee, tea, chocolate, and many other foods. Okay, these are the source of calcium. And also we get calcium from the bones itself. Okay. We saw that in condition where there is low levels of calcium, PTH will be released, and it will increase the osteoclastic activities, thereby resulting in bone resorption. This makes available the calcium needed in the blood for physiological processes. Now, in terms of regulation of blood calcium levels, okay, if you are asked to describe the physiology, the homeostatic mechanism involved in regulation of calcium levels, you need to mention PTH, you need to mention calcitriol, and you need to mention calcitonin. And these hormones, I've talked about these hormones. Okay. So regulation of calcium is mainly by these three hormones: PTH, calcitriol, which we said is also called 1,25-dihydrocholecalciferol, and we also have calcitonin. Okay. Although there are other hormones that somehow can influence the calcium levels in the body. Okay. One of them is cortisol from the adrenal cortex. This one decreases the levels of calcium. And then we also have growth hormone from the anterior pituitary gland. This also increases the levels of calcium in the body. That's why hypersecretion of growth hormone, it is associated with hypercalcemia. Okay, so growth hormone increases the blood calcium levels by increasing the intestinal absorption of calcium. It is also suggested that it increases the urinary excretion of calcium. However, this action, it's not very significant. But for the cortisol, which are stress hormones, or we can call them the glucocorticoids, they decrease calcium levels by inhibiting intestinal absorption and increasing the renal excretion of calcium. Okay, so you just need to know that apart from the calcitriol, parathormone, and calcitonin, there are these two important hormones that can also have a profound effect on calcium. Okay, so we've seen that apart from these hormones having effects on calcium, they can also affect phosphates. So it's just important so that we mention something about the phosphate. This is an essential mineral. I've shown you the diagram there, with an atomic number of 15. Okay, it's called phosphorus, atomic weight of 30.9. And the symbol is P. So this phosphate or phosphorus is required by every cell in the body for the normal function. Okay, and many foods that we eat, they contain phosphorus, like the beans, the groundnuts, the milk. Okay, they contain phosphorus. So, but phosphorus usually exists in form of phosphate. Okay, it exists in form of phosphate. So what's the importance? The importance of phosphate is a component of many organic substances like ATP. When you look at adenosine triphosphate, it's made up of the pentose sugar there. They are also phosphates and the nitrogenous base. Others like DNA, the RNA. Okay. Another importance of phosphate, along with calcium, it forms an important constituent of bones and teeth. Okay. It also acts as buffer in the maintenance of acid-base balance. Okay. We know that the normal levels of acid should be in the range of 7.35 to about 7.45. So phosphates are important also as buffers. They prevent fluctuation of blood pH. So the normal values of these phosphates in a normal healthy person is 4 milligrams per deciliter. 4 milligrams per deciliter. But we saw the normal levels of calcium is, I said 7 to about 11 milligrams per deciliter. So the normal levels of phosphate is 4 to 4 milligrams per deciliter. Okay. So how is this phosphate regulated? What ensures that the levels of phosphate remains around 4 milligrams per deciliter? So this diagram shows regulation of phosphate. Okay. So regulation is a very important concept in physiology. It's actually homeostasis. If there is disturbance in homeostasis, it results into pathological condition or diseases. And we know that diseases is just disturbances in normal homeostasis. Okay. So phosphorus is regulated mainly by these 3 hormones, which we've talked about. We have calcitriol from the kidneys. We have parathormone from the parathyroid gland. We also have calcitonin from the parafollicular cells. Okay. Also, there are these. Let's not forget about growth hormones and cortisol. They can also influence phosphate levels. So like calcitriol, what's the effect? It increases phosphate levels. But PTH and calcitonin, they decrease phosphate levels. Now, remember PTH, whenever there is secretion of PTH, it will increase calcium absorption, but decrease phosphate. Whenever there is PTH being secreted, it will increase the levels of calcium in the blood, but it will reduce the levels of phosphates. But for calcitonin, it will reduce the levels of calcium in the blood, but it will also reduce the levels of phosphates. Okay, should just take note of that. So calcitonin, we are saying it decreases the plasma levels of phosphate by inhibiting bone resorption and stimulating the urinary secretion. Okay. So before we look at physiology of the bone, try to reflect on what I'm just talking about on the regulation of phosphate.